Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started on our job is to remove the wheel. To do that, remove all of your lug nuts and then go ahead and take it off. Now that the wheel's off, we have a nice clear view of our caliper. We're going to have to start removing this. Something that you're probably going to notice is we're going to have to replace our flex hose, but that's a story for another day. For us on this video, the next thing I'm going to do is remove my caliper mounting bolts. There's one here and one right up here. With both of those bolts out, the next thing I'm going to do is use a pry bar, and I'm going to come in between this area here and just gently push back my pistons a little bit. There we are. Remove the caliper and set it aside. Now the next thing I like to do is go ahead and take out the pads right here. Sometimes you'll have to pry them out with something. Do the same to the outer pad. Now that the pad's out, let's continue on to inspecting the caliper, especially around these boots right here. If you see any fluid coming out, it's more than likely brake fluid, and if that's the case, you need to replace your calipers. Assuming it looks good, go ahead and take one of your old brake pads, put it right on here, and then we're going to push back both of these pistons at the same time. So we're going to watch those pistons just go back. All right. Now let's move along to removing our bracket. To do that, remove both of these bolts. Just going to leave that in a couple threads. Set this aside. Now the next thing we're going to do is move along to removing the rotor from the hub. It's a good idea to go ahead and spray it down with a little bit of penetrant because typically they're stuck on there. Assuming you're getting rid of your rotor anyways, you can feel free to bonk right on the braking surface. Just be careful for anything that might come off. Remove your rotor. With the rotor off there, now let's take a peek right behind this area and look at the e-brake shoes. You want to inspect them, make sure they still have plenty of meat back there and everything isn't very rusted up. Assuming it looks good, we're going to continue on to cleaning up our mating surface of our hub. Once you clean off the main areas of the hub, you need to make sure you get in between the studs here and the hub area in the center. Let's spray this off. Once you have it as clean as you can get it, continue on by adding a little bit of copper never seized to the mating surface. So now before we get our rotor on, I wanted to show you this area right here. That's going to be the adjustment point for your e-brake shoes. To adjust it, you can come right through the back side of the backing plate, right inside this slot right here, and then you'll be able to use a little tool, and you can of course turn that adjustment star to the adjustment point you need. With that said, let's grab the rotor. Before we put on our brand new rotor, let's go ahead and clean down all three braking surfaces. And of course, the inside area here where the emergency brake shoes are going to ride. Make sure all three of these surfaces are nice and clean, and let's get it on the truck. Now I'm going to start one of my lug nuts on here just to hold the rotor still. Now that we have the rotor on here and we have it held steady, we're going to continue on to adjusting that e-brake. You just want to adjust it up so you can just barely hear a little bit of drag, but it doesn't actually hold the brakes. And then of course you want to hop inside the truck, go ahead and push on that e-brake and then try to turn this. If it still spins, you need to continue adjusting. Once it's good, we'll move along. Now we're going to clean up our caliper bracket. What I mean by that is, of course, we have to remove our tins. We'll set those aside for recycling. The next thing you want to do is grab onto your slider pin here. Go ahead and give it a twist and remove it. Now you can grab onto the boot, Typically, you can just kind of squish it and remove it from the bracket. We're going to do the same to the other side. With all that out of there, let's continue on to cleaning up our slider ports. Use a bore brush. Use a collection bucket, put it in there. Give it another spray, and then do the same to the other side. With both of our ports cleaned, let's move along to cleaning up the bracket. The areas on the bracket that you want to clean up are going to be the areas that the tin was sitting on. So you have a groove here and right there, and then of course on the other side of the bracket. Now, as you can tell, I have both of these cleaned up. I'm going to do the same to the other side of the bracket. Now that I have both sides of my bracket cleaned up, the next thing I want to pay attention to is the area in between those areas we just cleaned. If you see any buildup along the sides or even in the center, go ahead and knock it out of there. If you don't, it could potentially hit up against your rotor. Now that we have the bracket cleaned up, let's clean our sliders. Looking at your slider, you have the shaft area here that's going to go inside of your bracket. You want to make sure that that's nice and clean. You also want to make sure it's not very rust pitted. Something that's very important is up closest to my fingers up in here. You're going to find that there's a groove. That groove is going to be, of course, the part that connects up against this boot right here. So if your groove has crud in it or it's damaged, moisture can make its way in, and of course your caliper isn't going to function right after a while. Let's go ahead and clean this off. Just going to wipe it. And then of course try to get into that groove. If you need to use a brush, go ahead and use a brush. Make sure it's as clean as possible. Do the same to the other one. Perfect. Now let's move along to cleaning our boots. The first thing you want to pay attention to with the boots is, of course, the condition of them. If it feels as though it's dry rotted and you can't squish it at all, well then of course it's not going to function properly. Go ahead and give it a couple squeezes and just make sure that it's nice and pliable. You also want to stretch it out. If you see any damage on it, looks like it's ripped or torn in any way, you need to go ahead and replace it. Assuming all those things look decent, let's clean it out. To do that, it's going to be easiest using a rag. I'm just going to kind of twist it a little bit. We'll put it right through here, and then we'll work it. With the rag in there, now we can just take it like this, and we're just going to rub right along the inside up against the rag. Take a look inside. This looks great. Do the same to the other one. Now let's take a little bit of caliper grease and we're just going to run it right along the areas on the bracket that we cleaned up. This is going to help with vibration dampening, noise reduction, and of course help keep moisture away from the area. Do the same to all 4 points. With the lubricant on there, now it's going to be time to install the tins. Just going to slide this on here. Now we'll do the same to the other one as well. With both the tins on there, let's continue on to adding a little bit of lubricant around this area here where the slider pin's going to go. I want to make sure I get all the way up into the lip area along the very end and just try to get a little bit inside the tube area there. The next thing we're going to do is put on our caliper slider boot here. The best way to go ahead and do this is to start one side in at a time and then just roll it in. Once you have it in there, go ahead and give it a couple good twists just to make sure it's completely in there. Now we'll grab our slider pin. I'm going to add some lubricant along the shaft area of it. And then just as important, up inside this groove area right here, the one that I told you to make sure you clean out well, go ahead and make sure you put lubricant in there. That's going to help keep the moisture out. Once you have it well lubricated, slide it into the caliper boot. And then do the same to the other side. There we are. Work that around a little bit. Let's get it on the truck. Let's slide our caliper bracket over the rotor and start in both of our bolts. It's a good idea to use a little bit of red thread locker for these. Now we'll just bottom out these bolts and then we'll torque them to 150 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to put on our brake pads. We're just going to slide in one ear along the bottom, one along the top, and then go ahead and press it right in. There we are. Do the same to the rear. Next, we're going to grease 5 places on our caliper itself. Each piston, and then each one of these ears. Now let's grab that caliper. We're going to bring it right over here and slide it over the pads. Once you have it lined up, go ahead and put in your caliper slider bolts. A tiny bit of red thread locker will be a good idea. Next, we're going to snug these up and torque them to 27 foot-pounds. Now let's get our lug nut off of here and put on our wheel. Now let's go ahead and start on all of our lug nuts. We'll snug them up, get it down onto the ground, and then we'll torque the lug nuts to 165 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friends, that job was fairly easy. All you have left to do now is go ahead and pump up your brake pedal so it's nice and firm. Double check that e-brake, make sure it holds for you, release it, and then take it for a road test.